They say the cruelest moment in a wolf's life isn't when fate breaks your bones. It's when it hands you everything you ever wanted, lets you hold it for one perfect second, then rips it away while the whole damn kingdom watches you bleed. My name is Selene Vaelor, and the night I discovered my fated mate was the same night he destroyed me in front of hundreds of wolves who laughed like my suffering was their evening entertainment. But here's what those bastards didn't know. Some of us don't stay broken. Some of us rise from the ashes wearing crowns made of the very fire that tried to burn us alive. If you want to know how a servant girl became the queen who brought empires to their knees, you better stick around till the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my pack is listening. Because this story, it's about to get bloody. The Grand Hall of House Raverin reeked of old money and older blood. Selene kept her eyes down like she'd been taught since childhood, her calloused hands gripping the silver tray hard enough to leave marks. Above her head, obsidian chandeliers dripped with candlelight that cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. The nobles didn't see her. They never did. To them, she was furniture with a pulse, another gray shadow carrying wine between their silk-draped tables, while they toasted to bloodlines she'd never be worthy of joining. The Blood Moon Gathering happened once every decade, when the strongest packs gathered to witness unmated wolves find their destined partners under the watchful eye of the ancient lunar magic that governed their kind. Selene had no business being here except to serve, to keep her head low and her mouth shut, to survive another night in a kingdom that had owned her since the massacre that killed her parents when she was 6 years old. She didn't remember much from before. Just fire. Screaming. Her mother's hand going cold in hers. After that, she'd been property. A nameless Omega servant in the household of the very wolves who'd burned her world to ash, though she hadn't known that truth yet. Wouldn't know it for years. All she knew was the weight of the tray in her hands, the ache in her feet from 14 hours of standing, and the gnawing hunger that came from eating scraps after the nobles finished gorging themselves. She was refilling a goblet for some drunk warrior who'd already grabbed her wrist twice when the scent hit her. Everything stopped. The hall didn't go silent, the music didn't fade. But for Selene, the world collapsed into a single point of awareness so sharp it felt like someone had driven a knife straight through her sternum. Smoke and winter steel, burning cedar, and something else, something wild and dark and utterly hers. Her wolf, the pathetic, broken thing that had never even fully manifested, surged awake inside her chest for the first time in her life. The bond snapped into place like a chain made of starlight and inevitability, dragging her attention across the crowded hall toward the elevated platform where the crown beta stood beside the most beautiful she-wolf Selene had ever seen, Lucien Draven. Even his name sounded like power. Broad-shouldered and battle-scarred, with silver eyes that could freeze blood, and a presence that made seasoned warriors step aside without him saying a word. He was everything the old stories promised a mate would be. Strong, fierce, untouchable. And he was hers. The tray slipped from Selene's hands. Crystal shattered against marble. Wine spread across the floor like spilled blood. Nobles turned to glare at the clumsy servant, but Selene couldn't hear their complaints. Couldn't feel the sting of wine soaking through her thin dress. Her entire body had become a compass with only one direction, pulling her forward through the crowd toward the male whose soul the moon had bound to hers before either of them were born. She didn't choose to move, her feet carried her anyway. The crowd parted without realizing why. Some ancient instinct making space for the sacred recognition happening in their midst. Selene's heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to crack bone. She'd never wanted anything in her life except to survive another day. But now she wanted this with a desperation that terrified her. Please, she thought. Please let this be real. Lucien's head turned. His nostrils flared as he caught her scent, and Selene watched recognition slam into him like a physical blow. For one perfect crystalline moment, his silver eyes went wide with the same shocked wonder that was probably written all over her face. The mating bond sang between them, a golden thread visible only to their souls, pulsing with magic older than kingdoms. Then his expression changed. The wonder died. Something else took its place. Something cold and calculating and utterly devastating. Lucien's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He glanced at Lady Selene Vaelor beside him, the daughter of the wealthiest northern bloodline, draped in diamonds and silk, and the kind of confidence that came from never once doubting your place in the world. Then he looked back at Selene, still standing there in her servant's rags with wine-stained hands and hope bleeding out of her chest, and he started laughing. Not a surprised laugh, not a nervous one, a cruel laugh, the kind that cut deeper than any blade. "You've got to be joking," Lucian said, his voice carrying across the hall with perfect, devastating clarity. "The moon goddess pairs me with this?" The hall went silent then. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the room turned toward the platform where the Crown Beta stood beside his intended political match, and the pathetic Omega servant who'd somehow stumbled into a fate she had no business claiming. Selene's throat closed. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The bond in her chest pulled tighter, begging her to go to him, to make him understand, to fix whatever was breaking between them before it shattered completely. "Lucienne," she whispered. Her voice came out broken. "Please." He descended the platform steps with the casual grace of a predator approaching prey. The crowd parted for him instantly. By the time he reached her, Selene was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Up close, he was even more devastating, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the intoxicating scent of her mate, feel the bond screaming at her to touch him. She reached out without thinking. Lucienne caught her wrist before her fingers could brush his chest. His grip was iron, his silver eyes were ice. "Don't," he said quietly. Then louder, for the crowd. "Look at this. Look at what fate tried to saddle me with. A servant. An Omega so weak her wolf probably can't even shift. What exactly did the moon think I was supposed to do with you?" Each word landed like a fist. Selene felt something cracking inside her chest, something vital and irreplaceable. "I don't understand," she managed. "The bond." "The bond is a mistake," Lucian cut her off. His voice dropped lower, meant only for her ears, which somehow made it worse. "You think I'm going to throw away my alliance with House Valacrest for you? You think I'm going to tie myself to some nameless servant girl who smells like kitchen grease and looks like she hasn't eaten in a week? You're nothing, Selene. You've always been nothing, and I will be damned if I let the moon goddess ruin my future because she has a sense of humor." The rejection hit her before he even said the words. She felt it building in his chest, felt the way he was gathering his will like a weapon, preparing to sever the sacred bond that was supposed to be unbreakable. "No!" Selene gasped. "Please, you can't." Lucian Draven, Crown Beta of the Blackthorn Kingdom, reject you as my mate." The bond snapped. It didn't fade. It didn't gently dissolve. It shattered like glass inside her chest, every fragment tearing through her from the inside out. Selene's legs gave out. She hit the marble floor hard enough to crack her knees, but she didn't feel it. Couldn't feel anything except the agony of having her soul ripped in half while the other half stood above her, watching with detached satisfaction. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her wolf howled inside her mind, a broken, keening wail that no one else could hear. Blood filled her mouth. She didn't know if she'd bitten her tongue or if the rejection had torn something deeper. Around her, the nobles laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that their amusement echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Enough that Selene would hear that sound in her nightmares for the rest of her life. Lucienne had already turned away. He was climbing back up to the platform, back to Lady Seraphine who welcomed him with a knowing smile, back to the life he'd chosen over the fate the moon had written for him. Selene knelt on the floor, shaking and bleeding and breaking, while the party resumed around her like she'd never mattered at all. She didn't know how long she stayed there. Seconds, hours. Time had stopped meaning anything. Then the doors exploded open. The impact was so violent that the entire hall shook. Ancient hinges screamed. One of the massive oak doors actually splintered, chunks of wood scattering across the entrance like shrapnel. The torches lining the walls guttered and died, plunging half the room into shadow. And through those shadows walked King Vaelin Mordrin. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Selene felt it even through the haze of pain, felt the way every wolf in the room suddenly went perfectly still, the way even the drunk warriors sobered instantly, the way Lady Seraphine's confident smile died on her face. The Alpha Sovereign didn't visit gatherings like this. He didn't attend social functions. He ruled from the Nightfang Citadel far to the north, a fortress carved into cliffs above a frozen sea. And when he emerged, it was usually because someone needed to die. He was massive. Not just tall, but broad, built like violence had been poured into a human shape and given a crown. Scars covered what little of his skin was visible, pale lines against tan flesh that spoke of 1,000 battles survived. His hair was black as a moonless night, pulled back from a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so clearly designed for cruelty. But it was his eyes that made grown alphas step back. Crimson. Not metaphorically red or reddish-brown. Actually, impossibly crimson, like someone had set rubies on fire and placed them in his skull. Those eyes swept the hall with the casual indifference of a predator, assessing which prey might be worth the effort to kill. They passed over nobles who'd built their reputations on fearlessness. They lingered on Lord Malric Raverin, the alpha who ruled this kingdom from his throne in the corner, making the older wolf's face go pale. Then Vaelin's gaze dropped to Selene, still kneeling in a pool of wine and her own blood. Everything stopped. Selene couldn't look away, couldn't move. The pain of the rejection was still tearing through her, but now it was joined by a different kind of fear. She'd never seen the Alpha Sovereign in person, had only heard the stories whispered by terrified servants. They said he'd conquered 6 kingdoms before his 30th year, that he'd killed his own father in single combat for the throne, that his wolf was twice the size of a normal alpha, black as hell itself, with fangs that could crush stone. They said a lot of things. Most of them were probably true. Vaelin crossed the hall. He didn't rush, didn't need to. Every step was measured and deliberate, boots striking marble with the finality of a funeral drum. Warriors pressed themselves against the walls to let him pass. Nobles who'd been laughing seconds ago suddenly found the floor fascinating. He stopped in front of Selene. Then, slowly, the most feared king in living memory lowered himself to one knee. The hall collectively stopped breathing. Vaelin reached out with one scarred hand and brushed his thumb across Selene's split lip, wiping away blood with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone built for destruction. His crimson eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through to her bones. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. Who did this? It wasn't a question. 3 words, flat and cold, carrying the promise of violence so absolute that Selene felt it in her marrow. She couldn't answer. Her throat was still closed, her body still shaking from the rejection, her mind struggling to understand why the Alpha Sovereign was kneeling in front of her like she mattered. Vaelin's jaw tightened. He looked up, gaze cutting across the silent hall until it landed on Lucia. The Crown Beta had gone very, very still on his platform, all that earlier arrogance draining away as he met the king's stare. You, Vaelin said, still quiet, still deadly. You rejected your fated mate. It was within my rights, Lucien managed. His voice was steady, but Selene could smell the fear on him now, acrid and sharp. She's an Omega, weak. I have a duty to my bloodline to choose a mate who can— Your duty, Vaelin interrupted, is to honor the bonds the moon goddess forges. Your duty is to recognize strength when it's standing in front of you, not to discard it because it doesn't come wrapped in silk and gold. But clearly, you're too much of a coward to understand that. The insult hit like a slap. Lucien's face flushed red. Around him, nobles gasped. No one called the Crown Beta a coward, not if they wanted to keep breathing. But Lucien didn't move, didn't challenge the accusation. Because challenging Vaelin Mordrin was suicide, and even wounded pride wasn't worth dying over. She's nothing, Lucien tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. A servant girl. You can't possibly— Vaelin's hand moved so fast Selene didn't see it. One moment he was kneeling beside her. The next, his fingers were wrapped around Lucien's throat, and the Crown Beta was dangling 2 feet off the ground, clawing uselessly at the iron grip cutting off his air. The king rose to his full height, holding Lucien like he weighed nothing, still not raising his voice, still terrifyingly calm. I'm going to explain something to you once, Vaelin said, and you're going to listen very carefully. Power isn't measured by who you can destroy. It's measured by what you're strong enough to protect. This girl, the one you threw away like garbage, has more worth in her smallest finger than you'll ever have in your entire miserable existence. The fact that you can't see that tells me everything I need to know about what kind of leader you'd have been. He released Lucien. The Crown Beta dropped to the platform, gasping and clutching his throat. Vaelin turned back to Selene, extended his hand, and said two words that would change everything. "Come here." It wasn't a command. Not quite. But Selene's body responded anyway, some part of her recognizing safety when it was offered, even if it came wrapped in violence and crimson eyes. She took his hand. The moment their skin touched, lightning arced up her arm. Not painful, electric, alive. Vaelin pulled her to her feet with effortless strength, steadying her when her legs threatened to give out again. Then he looked down at her with something that might have been recognition, or hunger, or both. "Mine," he said. The word echoed inside Selene's skull like a declaration of war. She felt something shift in the air, felt ancient magic stirring awake after centuries of sleep. Vaelin's eyes flared brighter, crimson light spilling from them like blood, and before Selene could process what was happening, he pulled her against his chest and sank his fangs into her throat. The claiming bite. Pain and pleasure exploded through her system in equal measure. She gasped, fingers clutching at Vaelin's shoulders, feeling his wolf rise to meet hers in a way that should have been impossible. The broken bond Lucien had severed was still bleeding in her chest, but this new connection slammed into place over it like molten gold poured into cracks. Silver light erupted from where their bodies met, expanding outward in a shockwave that shattered every window in the hall. Nobles screamed. Warriors threw up their arms to shield their eyes. Even Lord Malric fell back from his throne, terror written across his aged features. And inside Selene, something that had been sleeping for 18 years tore free. Her wolf surged forward with a roar that shook the foundations of the fortress. She felt her bones shifting, felt power flooding through her veins like a dam had burst, felt runes she'd never known existed burning to life across her skin in patterns of silver fire. The scent of Omega weakness vanished. In its place rose something older, royal, unmistakable, pure alpha bloodline. The entire hall dropped to their knees. Every wolf present, noble and servant alike, felt the pressure of her aura slam down on them like a physical weight. Even Lucien collapsed, his face going white as his body betrayed him, forcing him to submit to the female he'd rejected minutes ago. Vaelin pulled back from her throat, crimson eyes blazing with satisfaction. Blood stained his lips, but he didn't wipe it away. Just stared down at Selene like he'd found something he'd been searching for his entire life. "Not an Omega," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "Never an Omega. They buried you, little wolf, sealed your power under curse marks and lies. But I can feel what you really are." Selene's vision swam. The magic roaring through her was too much, too fast. She was going to pass out, going to collapse right here in front of everyone who'd ever looked at her like she was worthless. Vaelin caught her before she fell, swept her into his arms like she weighed nothing. "This gathering is over," he announced to the hall. His voice carried the absolute authority of someone who'd never been questioned in his life. "And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." No one moved. No one spoke. Vaelin turned and carried Selene toward the shattered doors, his crimson cloak billowing behind him. The crowd parted instantly, wolves scrambling over each other to get out of his way. As they passed Lucien, still kneeling on the platform with his hands pressed to the marble, Vaelin paused. "You had everything," he said quietly, "and you traded it for nothing. I almost feel sorry for you." Then he kept walking, carrying Selene out of the hall and into the winter night. Behind them, the blood moon hung heavy in the sky, watching the servant girl who'd just become a queen leave the kingdom that had enslaved her. And in the shadows of that crimson light, Lord Malric Raverin stared after them with growing dread, because he'd just recognized the girl in the Alpha Sovereign's arms, the last heir of House Vaelor, the bloodline he'd slaughtered 18 years ago. Walking out of his kingdom, very much alive. The cold hit Selene's face like a physical slap the moment they stepped outside. Vaelin's arms were iron around her, holding her against a chest that radiated heat despite the winter wind cutting through the fortress courtyard. She could still feel the silver light pulsing beneath her skin, could still taste blood in her mouth from where she'd bitten through her own tongue during the rejection. But underneath all that pain, something else was waking up. Something that had been buried so deep she'd never known it existed. Her wolf was different now, stronger. The pathetic creature that had cowered inside her for 18 years was gone, replaced by something that felt like lightning wrapped in fur and fury. She could feel it pacing beneath her ribs, testing the boundaries of her skin, hungry to break free and show the world exactly what they'd tried to destroy. "Where are we going?" she managed to whisper. Her voice came out rough, damaged from screaming during the bond break. Vaelin didn't slow his stride. Away from here. Away from wolves too stupid to recognize power when it's bleeding on their floor. His voice was different than it had been in the hall. Quieter. Almost gentle. Though gentle seemed like the wrong word for someone who looked like he'd been carved from violence and winter storms. She could feel his heartbeat through his chest, steady and unhurried despite the fact that he'd just claimed a stranger in front of an entire kingdom. Behind them, the fortress doors remained closed. No one followed. No one dared. A massive black stallion waited in the courtyard, its breath steaming in the frozen air. Vaelin lifted Selene onto its back like she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her in one fluid motion. His arms came around her again, reaching for the reins, caging her against him. "Hold on," he said. Then he drove his heels into the horse's flanks, and they exploded forward into the night. The world became a blur of shadows and snow. Selene's fingers clutched at Vaelin's forearms, feeling the corded muscle beneath his sleeves, feeling the steady strength of someone who'd never known what it meant to be afraid. The wind tore at her hair and her thin servant's dress, but his body blocked the worst of it, sheltering her even as they rode hard enough to kill a lesser horse. She should have been terrified, should have been questioning what the hell had just happened, why the Alpha Sovereign had claimed her, where he was taking her. But her mind felt fractured, still trying to process the last hour. The bond with Lucien snapping, the claiming bite, the silver fire that had erupted from her skin like she'd been born from starlight instead of flesh. The runes were still there. She could feel them burning beneath her clothes, invisible marks that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Ancient script she couldn't read but somehow understood on an instinctual level. They said her name, her real name, the one that had been stolen from her. Vaelor, House Vaelor, the lunar bloodline, the family that had ruled the Western territories for 300 years before Lord Malric Reverin had slaughtered them in a single night and seized their lands. Selene's parents, her brothers, her grandmother who'd been a healer so powerful she could call flesh back from ash. All of them burned, all of them gone, except her. "How?" she whispered into the wind. "How did you know?" Vaelin's arms tightened fractionally around her. "I didn't. Not until I touched you, but I've been searching for the last Vaelor heir for 5 years. Every lead went cold. Every witness turned up dead. I thought Malric had been thorough. Thought he'd erased your entire bloodline. Then why did you come tonight?" "Because Lucien Draven is an ambitious fool who's been plotting to challenge my rule for the last 2 years, and I wanted to watch him embarrass himself in front of the nobles who think he'd make a better king. The rejection was just a bonus. Proof that he doesn't have the spine to rule anything bigger than his own ego." Selene's throat tightened. "So you didn't come for me?" "No," Vaelin said bluntly. "I came to remind Lord Malric that his kingdom exists because I allow it to exist. You were an accident, a miracle I didn't deserve and wasn't looking for." His honesty cut deeper than comfort would have. Selene didn't know why. Didn't know why she wanted this stranger to tell her he'd crossed half the empire just to save her, when the truth was so much simpler. He'd been in the right place at the right time, nothing more. The horse began to slow as they climbed a steep ridge. Below them, the lights of House Revarin's fortress faded into the distance. Above them, the blood moon painted the snow crimson. Vaelin guided the stallion toward a narrow path carved into the cliffside. Selene's stomach dropped as she realized how high they'd climbed, how far the ground had fallen away beneath them. One wrong step and they'd plummet into darkness. But Vaelin's hands on the reins never wavered. He rode like he'd taken this path 1,000 times, even though she knew he couldn't have. The Nightfang Citadel was weeks away by horseback. "Where are we going?" she asked again. "Somewhere Malric's wolves can't follow. Somewhere you can learn what you are without someone trying to kill you for it." The path opened onto a plateau, and there, tucked against the mountainside like a secret carved into stone, stood a cabin. It was small. Rough timber and moss-covered shingles, smoke curling from a chimney that suggested someone had been here recently. Selene stared at it while Vaelin dismounted, her mind struggling to reconcile the image of the Alpha Sovereign keeping a safe house in enemy territory. He reached up to lift her down. His hand spanned her waist completely, and for a moment they stood there in the snow, her boots not quite touching the ground, his crimson eyes studying her face like he was trying to memorize something. Then he set her on her feet and stepped back. "Inside," he said, "before you freeze to death and waste all the effort I just put into keeping you alive." The cabin's interior was sparse but functional. A stone fireplace already burning low. A table with 2 chairs. A bed in the corner that looked barely big enough for one person, let alone someone Vaelin's size. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a sword rack on the wall held weapons that gleamed with the kind of care that spoke of regular use. Vaelin moved to the fireplace, adding wood with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Flames leapt higher, casting shadows across the hard planes of his face. Selene stood in the doorway, shivering. Now that the adrenaline was fading, exhaustion crashed into her like a physical weight. Her knees threatened to give out. Her head spun. "Sit," Vaelin ordered, without looking at her, "before you fall and crack your skull. I didn't haul you out of that cesspool just to have you die of shock in my safe house." She stumbled to the nearest chair and collapsed into it. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table, trying to steady them, trying to steady anything. Vaelin disappeared into a back room and returned with a rough wool blanket that he dropped over her shoulders. Then he pulled out the other chair, spun it around backward, and straddled it so he could face her across the table. "Talk," he said. "About what? About what you remember. About your family. About how the hell you ended up serving wine in the house of the man who slaughtered everyone you loved." Selene's throat closed. "I don't remember much. I was 6 when they died. There was fire. My mother told me to run. I ran. When I came back, everything was ash. Lord Malric's wolves found me wandering in the ruins. They told me I was an orphan, that my family had been traitors who got what they deserved. They put me to work in the kitchens and told me if I ever tried to leave, they'd slit my throat. And you believed them. I was 6 years old and covered in my mother's blood. What else was I supposed to believe?" Vaelin's jaw tightened. "Fair enough. And your wolf? When did you realize something was wrong with it?" Selene pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It never fully manifested. I'd feel it sometimes, like something trapped under ice, but I could never shift. The pack healers said I was defective, a broken omega who'd never be worth mating. After a while, I stopped trying. Because someone made sure you'd stop trying," Vaelin said quietly. "Someone sealed your wolf under curse marks designed to keep you weak, keep you controllable, keep you from ever realizing who you were. The runes." "The runes," he confirmed. "I felt them when I bit you. Ancient, dark magic, the kind that requires blood sacrifice to cast. Whoever did this to you wasn't just trying to hide you. They were trying to make sure that even if you survived, you'd never be a threat." Selene's hands curled into fists on the table. "Why? Why go through all that trouble? Why not just kill me with the rest of my family?" Vaelin leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "Because killing a child of the lunar bloodline comes with consequences. The moon goddess doesn't forget, doesn't forgive. Every alpha who's ever tried to wipe out a lunar line has died screaming, usually within a year. But cursing you, keeping you alive but powerless, that's a loophole. You weren't dead, so the goddess couldn't exact vengeance, but you weren't a threat either. Until tonight." "Until tonight," Vaelin agreed. "Until I broke the curse with the claiming bite and your real wolf tore free. Now you're exactly what Malric spent 18 years trying to prevent. The rightful heir to House Vaelor, the Alpha Queen of the Western Territories, and the single biggest threat to his stolen throne." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Selene wasn't ready to face. "I don't know how to be any of those things," she said quietly. "I'm a servant. I carry wine and scrub floors. I don't know how to rule. Don't know how to fight. I can barely control this thing inside me that's trying to claw its way out of my chest." "Good." She looked up sharply. "What?" Vaelin's crimson eyes caught the firelight, turning them molten. "Good that you know your limitations. Good that you're not delusional enough to think 18 years of slavery didn't leave marks. The wolves who survive aren't the ones who pretend they're fine. They're the ones who admit they're broken and learn to weaponize the sharp edges. That's a twisted way of looking at survival." "That's the only way of looking at survival," Vaelin corrected. "You think I built an empire by being soft. You think I held 6 kingdoms together by pretending trauma doesn't exist? I'm a monster, Selene. I know exactly what I am. The difference between me and wolves like Lucien is that I've made peace with it. He's still pretending he's something noble while he stabs people in the back. I just stab them from the front and sleep fine afterward. The bluntness should have terrified her. Instead, it was almost comforting. No false promises, no pretty lies. Just brutal honesty from someone who'd clearly spent his entire life surviving the same way she had. So what happens now, she asked. Now you sleep. Tomorrow we start training. I'm going to teach you how to shift, how to fight, how to use the power burning through your veins before it burns you alive from the inside. And when you're ready, when you're strong enough that no one will ever throw you on the floor and laugh again, we're going to go back to that fortress and take everything Malric stole from you. And if I don't want that, if I just want to disappear, live somewhere quiet where no one knows my name. Vaelin stood, the chair scraping against the floor. Then Malric will hunt you down within a year and finish what he started. You don't get to opt out of this, little wolf. The moment I broke that curse, you became a player in a game you've been part of since birth. You can either learn the rules and win, or you can keep pretending you're not a threat and die when someone decides you're too dangerous to leave alive. He moved toward the bed, started pulling off his weapons with the practiced ease of someone who'd been armed since childhood. Sword belt, twin daggers, a throwing knife from his boot. You take the bed, he said without looking at her. I'll take the floor. We can share, Selene heard herself say, then immediately regretted it when Vaelin turned to stare at her with an expression she couldn't read. You've been claimed and rejected in the same night, he said carefully. Your body is in shock. Your wolf is still stabilizing. The last thing you need is an alpha male in your space while you're this vulnerable. I'm not asking you to touch me. I'm saying the bed is big enough for 2 people to sleep without crossing a line, and you just spent half the night riding through a blizzard to save someone you didn't even know existed. Take the damn bed. Something flickered across Vaelin's face. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Fine. But if you change your mind, say so. I won't be offended. He finished removing his weapons, then his boots, then the heavy crimson cloak that made him look like he'd stepped out of a nightmare. Underneath, he wore simple black clothing that did nothing to hide the brutal efficiency of his build. Selene stood on shaking legs and moved toward the bed. She didn't bother removing her servant's dress, didn't have anything else to wear, and the thought of being more vulnerable than she already was made her skin crawl. She slid under the blankets on the far side. Vaelin took the other side, keeping a careful foot of space between them. For someone so large, he moved with surprising grace, settling onto the mattress without jostling her. The silence stretched. Selene stared at the ceiling, listening to the fire crackle and the wind howl outside. Her body ached everywhere. The claiming bite on her throat throbbed in time with her pulse. She could still feel the phantom pain of the rejection, still hear Lucian's voice calling her nothing. Why did you really claim me? She whispered into the darkness. Vaelin was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, because when I saw you on that floor, bleeding and broken while those bastards laughed, I felt something I haven't felt in 15 years. Rage. Not the cold, calculating kind I used to rule. Real rage. The kind that makes you want to burn the world down and salt the earth so nothing ever grows there again. And when I touched you, when I felt what they'd done to you, what they'd buried inside you, I knew that if I walked away, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Selene turned her head on the pillow to look at him. In the firelight, his profile was all hard edges and brutal beauty. A killer's face. A king's face. You could have just killed Lucien and left, she said. Could have made your point without claiming me. Without tying yourself to a broken Omega who doesn't even know how to be what you say she is. Vaelin turned to meet her gaze. His crimson eyes were steady, unflinching. Yeah, he said simply. I could have, but I didn't want to. The honesty was devastating in its simplicity. No grand declarations, no destiny speeches, just a powerful male admitting he'd made a choice based on instinct rather than strategy. Selene didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to process the fact that the most feared alpha in 6 kingdoms had claimed her not because she was useful, but because some part of him had simply wanted to. Sleep, Vaelin said quietly. Tomorrow's going to be hell, and you need your strength. He turned away, giving her his back in a gesture of trust that felt more intimate than any touch. Selene closed her eyes. Exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide, dragging her down into darkness. Her last conscious thought was that for the first time in 18 years, she felt safe. She woke to pain, not the dull ache of exhaustion or the sharp sting of the claiming bite. This was deeper, hotter, like someone had poured molten metal directly into her veins and set it on fire. Selene bolted upright, gasping. Sweat soaked through her dress. Her skin felt too tight, like something inside her was trying to tear its way out. The shift. Her wolf was trying to manifest. Vaelin was already awake, already moving. He caught her shoulders before she could throw herself out of bed, his grip firm but not painful. "Breathe," he commanded. "Look at me. Breathe." "I can't," Selene choked out. It hurts so much. "I know, but fighting it makes it worse. Your wolf has been caged for 18 years. You need to let it out, or it's going to rip you apart from the inside." His voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who'd talked people through this before. Selene tried to focus on his face, on his crimson eyes that glowed in the pre-dawn darkness, on the warmth of his hands anchoring her to something solid, while her entire body tried to tear itself into a new shape. "I don't know how," she gasped. "Yes, you do. Stop thinking. Stop trying to control it. Just let go. Let go, as if it were that simple. As if she hadn't spent her entire life learning to control herself, to make herself smaller, to never let anyone see what she was feeling. But the pain was getting worse. Her bones were shifting, joints popping out of place and reforming. Her teeth felt too sharp in her mouth. Vaelin's hands moved to frame her face, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "You're not that scared little girl anymore," he said quietly. "You're not a servant. You're not broken. You're a lunar alpha, and your wolf has been waiting 18 years to show you what that means. So stop being afraid of your own power and let it out." The words hit something deep inside her, something that had been buried under years of being told she was worthless, being told she was weak, being told she would never be enough. That thing roared to life. Selene threw her head back and screamed as the shift took her. Her body exploded into silver light. Bones cracked and reformed. Muscle tore and rebuilt itself. Her dress shredded as fur erupted across her skin, thick and soft and the color of moonlight on fresh snow. She hit the floor on 4 legs, panting. Her vision had changed, sharper and clearer than it had ever been. Her sense of smell was overwhelming, picking up everything from the wood smoke to Vaelin's scent to the rabbit that had passed by the cabin 3 days ago. And she was huge. Selene had seen other wolves shift. Normal wolves stood maybe 3 feet at the shoulder, 4 if they were a particularly strong alpha. She was easily 5 feet tall, maybe more. Her paws were the size of dinner plates. When she turned her head to look at herself, she saw silver fur marked with patterns of light that moved like living constellations. "Holy hell," Vaelin breathed. He'd shifted too, his own massive black wolf standing near the fireplace, watching her with eyes that burned crimson even in his animal form. He was bigger than her, but not by much. Selene took a tentative step forward. Her legs felt strange, powerful, like she could leap over the cabin if she wanted to. Energy coursed through her muscles, begging to be used. Outside, Vaelin's voice echoed in her mind through the pack link. "Run with me." He burst through the cabin door without waiting for an answer. Wood splintered, cold air rushed in, and Selene followed. They ran, through snow that barely slowed them, over frozen streams that cracked beneath their weight, up slopes so steep a human would have needed climbing gear. Selene's wolf moved with an instinct she didn't know she possessed, her body flowing over obstacles like water, her paws finding purchase on ice that should have sent her tumbling. Vaelin ran beside her, matching her pace, not leading, not following, just running alongside her like they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. The sun began to rise, painting the snow gold and pink. Selene felt wild, free. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid, wasn't small, wasn't trying to make herself invisible. She was powerful, and it felt like coming home. They ran until the sun was fully above the horizon. Then Vaelin led her back to the cabin, back to the warmth and safety of 4 walls. The shift back was easier, less painful. Selene collapsed on the floor, naked and gasping, her skin steaming in the cold air. Vaelin tossed her a blanket without comment, then shifted back himself. He'd already turned away, giving her privacy while she wrapped the wool around her body. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I could fight an army." She heard the smile in his voice, even though she couldn't see his face. "Good. Because in about 3 days you're going to need to." Selene's blood went cold. "What?" Vaelin finally turned around. He'd pulled on pants, but nothing else, and the scars covering his torso caught the morning light. There's no way Malric didn't feel that shift. Every wolf within 50 miles probably felt it. A lunar alpha manifesting that much power leaves a signature that echoes across the territory. He knows you're alive now, knows you're not the broken Omega he thought he'd buried, so he'll come for me. "He'll send everything he has," Vaelin confirmed. "And we have 3 days, maybe 4 if we're lucky, to make sure you're ready to survive it." The words settled over her like armor, heavy, necessary. Selene stood, keeping the blanket wrapped around herself. Her legs were steady now, her breathing even. The terror that should have been there was absent, replaced by something colder, something that felt a lot like rage. "Then we'd better get started," she said. Vaelin's smile was sharp enough to cut. "That's my girl." The next 3 days were hell. Vaelin didn't believe in gentle training or building up slowly. He threw Selene into combat the moment she could hold her shifted form for more than an hour, forcing her to defend herself against an opponent who'd been fighting since before she was born. She lost every single round. He was faster, stronger, more experienced. He'd anticipate her moves before she made them, counter her attacks with casual efficiency, and put her on her back in the snow so many times she stopped counting. But she got better. By the second day, she managed to land a hit. Just one, her claws raking across his shoulder before he spun and slammed her into a tree hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. By the third day, she lasted a full minute before he pinned her. "Good," Vaelin said after their last sparring session. His crimson eyes gleamed with approval. "You're learning to read opponents instead of just reacting. Keep that up, and you might actually survive your first real fight." Selene lay in the snow, panting. Every muscle in her body screamed. Her shoulder was dislocated from where Vaelin had thrown her. She could feel it grinding wrong in the socket. Vaelin knelt beside her, his hands already moving to her shoulder. "This is going to hurt." She barely had time to brace before he snapped it back into place. Pain exploded white-hot behind her eyes. She bit down on her tongue hard enough to taste blood, refusing to scream. When the agony faded to a dull throb, Vaelin was still kneeling beside her. Snow clung to his dark hair. A cut on his cheek bled sluggishly, where she'd managed to catch him with her claws. "You're going to be terrifying once you figure out what you're doing," he said quietly. "I already am terrifying. I just need to learn how to aim it." His lips curved into something that might have been a smile. Damn right. That night, they sat by the fire while Vaelin explained the politics of the wolf kingdoms, the alliances, the grudges, the debts owed and betrayals never forgotten. "Lord Malric rules House Ravarin, but he's not well liked," Vaelin said. "He took power through murder and fear, and the noble families remember that. They bow to him because the alternative is death, not because they respect him. So if I challenge him—" "When you challenge him," Vaelin corrected. "Not if. When. And when you do, you'll have support from wolves who've been waiting 18 years for someone to give them permission to rebel." Selene stared into the flames. "And what about you? What do you get out of this?" Vaelin was quiet for a moment. A loyal alpha queen ruling the Western territories instead of a paranoid tyrant who's been plotting to undermine my rule for 2 decades. And maybe, if I'm lucky, someone I can trust to watch my back in a world where trust usually gets you killed. The honesty was stark, unvarnished. Selene found herself respecting it. "You really don't lie, do you?" she said. "Lies are for wolves who are afraid of the truth. I'm not afraid of anything, not even losing, especially not losing." Vaelin's crimson eyes met hers across the fire. "Because I've already lost everything that mattered. My family, my humanity, my ability to care about anything except survival. What's left to take?" The words hit harder than any blow he'd landed during training. Selene realized she was looking at someone who'd survived the same way she had, by cutting away every soft part of themselves until all that remained was sharp edges and the will to keep breathing. We're the same, she said quietly. Aren't we? Valen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Yeah, little wolf, we're exactly the same. That's why this is going to work. On the fourth morning, Valen woke her before dawn. They're here, he said simply. Selene was already reaching for the leather armor he'd scavenged from the cabin's stores, already shifting into the mindset she'd been practicing. No fear, no hesitation, just cold focus on survival. How many? She asked. 20, maybe 30. Malric sent a hunting party, not an army. He's still testing, still trying to figure out what you are. And when they find out, they'll go back and tell him you're everything he was afraid of. Then he'll come himself, and the real war starts. Selene finished strapping on the armor, then met Valen's gaze. Good. I want him to know I'm coming. That's my queen. They left the cabin together and walked into the snow-covered forest where Malric's wolves waited. The hunters had spread out, trying to surround the plateau. Selene could smell them, could hear their heartbeats, could feel their anticipation like electricity in the air. Valen stopped at the edge of the tree line, shifted into his massive black wolf. His crimson eyes found hers. Remember what I taught you. Stay angry, stay focused, and don't you dare die before I give you permission. Then he charged. Selene watched him disappear into the trees, heard the first screams, felt the forest erupt into chaos. And then she followed. Her wolf was fury and moonlight. She hit the first hunter at full speed, her jaws closing around his throat before he could even shift. Blood sprayed hot across her tongue. She didn't stop to process the kill, just released and moved, her body flowing from one target to the next with an efficiency that should have terrified her. It didn't. This was what she'd been made for. This was what they'd tried to bury. This was the truth her enemies had feared enough to curse. She was a weapon, and she was done being afraid of herself. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, 15 wolves lay dead in the snow. The survivors fled, running back toward Ravaran territory with their tails between their legs. Selene stood among the corpses, her silver fur stained red, her chest heaving. She should have felt guilt, should have felt horror at what she'd just done. Instead, she felt alive. Valen padded toward her, his own coat matted with blood. He shifted back to human form, unconcerned with his nakedness or the cold. How many? He asked. 7, Selene said. Her voice was steady. No shake. No regret. 7 kills. Valen studied her face, searching for something. Then he nodded. You'll do, he said simply. They burned the bodies. It was practical, not ceremonial. Wolves who died in pack territory deserved proper rites. Wolves who came to murder you in the night deserved fire and unmarked graves. As the smoke rose into the morning sky, Selene felt the last piece of her old self burn away. The servant girl was gone. The frightened Omega who'd believed she was broken. The female who'd hoped Lucian Draven would save her. All of it. Ash. What stood in the snow watching enemies burn was something new. Something forged from suffering and rage and the kind of power that kingdoms had tried to bury because they knew it would destroy them. Valen stood beside her, silent, waiting. Finally, Selene spoke. When do we leave for Ravaran? Tomorrow, Valen said. We'll arrive during the Winter Dominion Summit. Every alpha in the territories will be there, bowing to Malric, renewing their oaths of loyalty. And you're going to walk into that throne room and take back everything that was stolen from you. And if they resist, then we kill everyone who stands between you and your birthright. The words should have shocked her, should have made her question what she was becoming. They didn't. Selene turned to face the king who'd claimed her, the monster who'd taught her to weaponize her trauma, the male who'd looked at a broken servant and seen a queen. Then let's go remind them what happens when you bury a goddess and forget to make sure she's dead. Valen's smile was sharp and terrible and proud. Now you're ready. The Winter Dominion Summit took place in a throne hall built from black marble and the bones of conquered enemies. Selene could smell the age of it the moment she and Valen crossed the threshold, could feel the weight of centuries pressing down from vaulted ceilings, carved with scenes of ancient battles and bloodlines long extinct. Every alpha ruler in the 6 territories stood gathered beneath crimson banners, their finest warriors flanking them like living shields. The air reeked of expensive wine and cheaper ambition, of wolves circling each other with smiles that didn't reach their eyes, while they calculated which alliances would survive the year and which would crumble into war. At the far end of the hall, seated on a throne made from obsidian and silver, Lord Malric Reverin watched his kingdom with the careful attention of a spider monitoring its web. He was older than Selene remembered. Gray streaked his dark hair. New lines creased his face, but his eyes were the same pale green she'd seen in nightmares for 18 years, cold and calculating and utterly merciless. The moment Selene stepped through the doors, those eyes locked onto her. She watched the recognition hit him, watched his expression shift from mild curiosity to shock, to something that looked almost like fear. His hand tightened on the armrest of his throne, hard enough that she heard wood crack even from across the hall. Good. Let him be afraid. Let him feel a fraction of what she'd felt when his wolves dragged her from the burning ruins of her family home and told her she was lucky to be allowed to serve the man who'd slaughtered everyone she loved. Valen's hand settled on the small of her back, a touch so light it was barely there but grounding nonetheless. His crimson eyes swept the assembled nobles with the lazy confidence of a predator who knew exactly how many seconds it would take to kill everyone in the room. The hall had gone silent. Conversations died mid-word. Warriors reached instinctively for weapons before remembering where they were, who was watching, what starting a fight here would mean. Selene walked forward. Not rushing, not hesitating, just moving with the same steady inevitability as the sunrise, her boots striking marble in a rhythm that echoed off stone walls. She'd dressed for this. Black leather armor reinforced with silver plates across the vital areas, her hair pulled back in a warrior's braid. No jewels, no silk, nothing soft or decorative or designed to make men think she was safe. The lunar runes on her skin glowed faintly beneath the leather, visible through gaps in the armor, like starlight bleeding through cracks in the world. Every wolf in the hall felt the pressure of her aura. She watched them sway, watched their eyes widen, watched the instinctive submission ripple through the crowd like a wave crashing against shore. Malric stood slowly from his throne. His movements were controlled, deliberate. But Selene could smell the fear on him now, sharp and acrid beneath the expensive cologne. "Who dares enter my court unannounced?" he said. His voice was steady, but she heard the tremor underneath, the uncertainty. Valen smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. "Someone who has more right to that throne than you ever did," he said quietly. "Someone you tried very hard to make sure would never stand in this hall. Someone whose family you murdered because you were too weak to take their territory through honorable challenge." Malric's jaw tightened. "I don't know what lies you've been fed, Alpha Sovereign, but her name is Selene Vaelor," Vaelen cut him off. "Last surviving heir of House Vaelor, the bloodline you slaughtered 18 years ago, the child you cursed and enslaved rather than killing cleanly because you were too much of a coward to face the consequences of murdering a lunar alpha." The hall erupted. Nobles shouted denials and questions. Warriors drew weapons. Ancient alphas who'd been alive during the Vaelor reign stared at Selene with expressions ranging from shock to horror to something that might have been hope. Malric's face had gone pale. "Impossible. The Vaelor line is extinct. You made sure to bury her under curse marks and force her into servitude," Valen corrected. "You made sure to hide what she was so thoroughly that she didn't even know herself. But you forgot something crucial about lunar bloodlines, Malric. You can't kill them. You can only make them stronger when they rise from the ashes you tried to bury them in." Selene stopped 10 feet from the throne, close enough to see the sweat beading on Malric's forehead, close enough to smell his fear mixing with the expensive wine on his breath. She let her wolf rise to the surface, let her eyes bleed silver, let the runes on her skin flare bright enough that nobles in the back rows had to shield their faces. The pressure in the hall intensified. Wolves dropped to their knees without meaning to, their bodies responding to an authority older than any crown Malric had ever worn. Even Malric swayed. His hand shot out to grip the throne for balance. "Prove it," he managed. His voice was hoarse now, stripped of its earlier authority. "Prove you are who you claim to be." Selene smiled. It felt like baring teeth. She reached up and unfastened the leather guard protecting her left shoulder, let it fall to the floor with a clatter. Then she turned, showing her back to the assembled nobles. Gasped echoed through the hall. There, burned into the skin between her shoulder blades, was the mark of House Vaelor, the lunar crest, a full moon crossed by two silver swords surrounded by ancient script that glowed with its own internal light. It was a birthmark, not a tattoo. Something written into her DNA by magic older than written language. Every heir of the lunar bloodline carried it, and there was no way to fake it, no spell that could replicate the way the mark pulsed in time with the phases of the actual moon hanging in the sky above the fortress. The eldest alpha in the room, a gray-haired she-wolf named Morrigan, who'd served Selene's grandmother as an advisor, made a sound like she'd been struck. Her ancient eyes filled with tears. "Little moon," Morrigan whispered. "By the goddess, you survived." Selene turned back to face Malric. The older alpha's face had gone from pale to ashen. His hands trembled where they gripped the throne. "Still need more proof?" Selene asked softly. "Or should I start listing the names of every family member you murdered? My father, Selene Vaelor, who you stabbed in the back during a peace negotiation. My mother, Ilara, who you burned alive in her own garden. My brothers, Caden and Reese, who were 8 and 6 years old when your wolves slit their throats. My grandmother, Lyora, the greatest healer in 6 kingdoms, who you beheaded and mounted on your wall like a hunting trophy." Each name landed like a physical blow. Malric flinched, staggered back a step. Selene kept advancing, kept speaking, kept pouring 18 years of buried rage into words sharp enough to cut. "You took everything from me. My family, my home, my name. You forced me to serve you, to bow to you, to pretend I was grateful for the scraps you threw me while I cleaned the floors my mother's blood had stained. You cursed me so thoroughly I didn't even remember what I'd lost. And you thought that made you safe, thought that made you strong." She was close enough to touch him now, close enough to see her reflection in his terrified eyes. "But here's what you never understood about power, Lord Malric. It's not about who you can break. It's about who breaks you when they put themselves back together." Malric's hand moved faster than she expected. A dagger appeared from his robes, the blade coated in something dark and viscous that reeked of poison. He lunged. Selene caught his wrist before the blade reached her throat. Her grip was iron. She squeezed, felt bones grind together, watched the dagger clatter to the floor as Malric's fingers spasmed open. The hall held its breath. Then Valen's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Stand down." But he wasn't talking to Malric. Selene's head whipped around just in time to see Valen collapse. He didn't fall dramatically, didn't cry out, just dropped to one knee like someone had cut his strings, one hand braced against the floor to keep from hitting face first. Behind him stood his own captain of the guard, a wolf named Kieran, who Selene had seen drilling warriors every morning at the Nightfang Citadel, who Valen had introduced as his most trusted lieutenant, who'd sworn loyalty to the crown with blood oaths older than kingdoms. Kieran held a syringe, empty. The tip still dripped with residue. "Wolfsbane and nightshade," Kieran said calmly, "mixed with a paralytic derived from deathcap mushrooms. Enough to drop an alpha in under 30 seconds. I've been carrying it for 3 years, waiting for the right moment." Valen tried to rise. His legs buckled. Crimson eyes blazed with fury, but his body wouldn't respond. The poison was working fast, shutting down muscle control, flooding his system with toxins specifically designed to incapacitate wolves. "You traitorous bastard," Valen ground out. His voice was already slurring. "I raised you, trained you, trusted you." Kieran smiled. It was the expression of a man who'd been wearing a mask for years and was finally allowed to take it off. "And that was your mistake, my king. You trusted. You believed loyalty could be bought with honor and fair treatment and all those noble ideals you cling to like they mean something. But Lord Malric understands the truth. Loyalty goes to whoever offers the most power. And he offered me a kingdom." Selene's blood went cold. She looked from Kieran to Malric, saw the older alpha's expression shift from fear to satisfaction, and understood with devastating clarity that she'd walked straight into a trap. This had never been about the summit, had never been about reclaiming her throne in front of witnesses. This had been about getting Valen in one place, vulnerable, surrounded by enemies. "You planned this," she said. Her voice came out flat. "Dead. All of it. The hunters you sent to the cabin, the timing of the summit. You wanted me to bring Valen here." Malric straightened, his earlier fear evaporating like it had never existed. "Of course I planned it. Did you think I survived 18 years on a stolen throne by being stupid? The moment I felt your wolf wake, I knew you'd come for me. Knew the Alpha Sovereign would help you because he's always had a weakness for lost causes. All I had to do was make sure his own wolves were ready to turn on him when the moment came. More guards were moving now. Wolves wearing Vaelin's colors, wolves who'd served the Nightfang Citadel for years, circling around their fallen king with weapons drawn. Selene counted 12, maybe 15, all of them watching her with the cold calculation of predators who knew they outnumbered their prey. Vaelin was still conscious, but barely. The poison had spread through his system, turning his powerful body into a cage. She could see him fighting it, see the rage burning in his eyes, but his muscles wouldn't obey. "You can't hold him," Selene said. She was backing toward Vaelin now, putting herself between him and the traitors. The poison will wear off. And when it does, he'll be in chains in my dungeons, Malric interrupted, awaiting trial for the crime of harboring a false heir and attempting to overthrow a legitimate ruler. The other alphas will demand justice, and I'll give it to them by executing the tyrant who's held 6 kingdoms in an iron fist for 15 years. He descended from his throne, each step measured and confident. This was his moment, his victory, the culmination of years of planning. As for you, little moon, he continued, you have a choice. Renounce your claim to House Vaelor. Publicly declare yourself an impostor. Submit to my rule, and I'll let you live as a servant again. It's more mercy than you deserve, but I'm feeling generous. And if I refuse, then I kill you the way I should have killed you 18 years ago. Slowly, painfully, in front of every alpha in the 6 territories so they understand what happens to wolves who challenge my authority. The guards were closing in. Selene could smell their anticipation, could see the weapons in their hands, could feel the trap tightening around her like a noose. Behind her, Vaelin made a sound low in his throat. Not pain, fury. He was trying to warn her, trying to tell her to run, to save herself, to abandon him the way any sensible wolf would when the odds turned this badly. But Selene had spent 18 years being sensible, being small, being the kind of wolf who survived by knowing when to run. She was done running. Her wolf surged forward with a roar that shook the foundations of the hall. Silver light exploded from her skin, so bright that nobles screamed and covered their eyes. The runes on her body ignited like stars going supernova, ancient magic flooding the air with power that made the chandeliers shatter and rain crystal down on the assembled crowd. Selene's body shifted, not into her wolf form, into something else, something between human and animal, something the old texts called the war shape. 7 feet of muscle and fur and fangs, bipedal but bestial, strong enough to tear through stone with her bare claws. The first guard who reached her died before he could swing his sword. Selene's claws punched through his chest armor like it was paper, tore out his heart, dropped him to the marble floor in a spreading pool of blood. The second guard hesitated. That hesitation cost him his life. Selene's jaws closed around his throat, ripped it out, painted the floor red. The other guards fell back, their earlier confidence cracking. But there were too many. Even in her war shape, even with power flooding through her veins, she couldn't fight 15 trained warriors and protect Vaelin at the same time. A blade sliced across her ribs. Pain bloomed hot and sharp. Another sword caught her shoulder, drawing blood that steamed in the cold air. Selene snarled and killed the wolves who'd wounded her, but more took their place. They were coordinating now, attacking from multiple angles, using numbers to overwhelm her superior strength. She was losing. And then the hall doors exploded inward for the second time in 5 minutes. Through the shattered entrance charged wolves wearing the crest of House Valcrest, Lady Seraphine's family. The northern bloodline with enough wealth and warriors to challenge even Malric's rule. At their head rode Lucien Draven. Selene's heart stopped. For one insane moment, she thought he'd come to help Malric finish her. Thought the male who'd rejected her had decided to make sure she stayed destroyed. But Lucien's sword was already swinging, already cutting through Malric's guards with brutal efficiency. His voice rang out across the chaos, commanding and cold. Stand down or die. Those are your only options. The Valacrest warriors flooded the hall, 50 of them, maybe more. They crashed into Malric's forces like a tidal wave, overwhelming the traitors through sheer numbers. Kieran tried to run. Lucien caught him before he made it 10 feet, drove a blade through the traitor's spine, let him drop choking on his own blood. Within minutes, it was over. Malric's guards were dead or disarmed. The traitorous wolves lay bleeding on marble that had seen too much blood already. Selene shifted back to human form, gasping. Wounds covered her body. Blood ran down her ribs, dripped from her shoulder. She swayed, nearly fell. Lucian caught her. His hands were steady, familiar. The touch she'd craved during that single perfect moment when she'd thought he was her mate. "Easy," he said quietly. "I've got you." Selene stared up at him, trying to understand, trying to reconcile the male who'd destroyed her with the one who'd just saved her life. "Why?" she managed. Lucian's silver eyes met hers. For the first time since she'd known him, there was no arrogance there, no cruelty. Just exhaustion, and something that might have been regret. "Because I was wrong," he said simply. "About you. About what matters. About everything. And I've spent the last 4 days realizing that the biggest mistake of my life wasn't rejecting my fated mate. It was rejecting the only female I've ever met who was strong enough to stand beside me instead of behind me." The words hit like physical blows. Selene wanted to be angry, wanted to throw them back in his face and remind him that he'd had his chance, that he'd chosen power over destiny, that she owed him nothing. But the truth was more complicated than anger. The truth was that she'd spent 3 days falling for a king who'd claimed her, trained her, turned her into a weapon sharp enough to reclaim a throne. And that king was currently dying 10 feet away while she stood in the arms of the male fate had chosen for her. "Vaelin!" she gasped. Lucian released her immediately, stepped back, gave her space to stumble toward the Alpha Sovereign, who'd collapsed fully onto the floor now, his breathing shallow and labored. Selene dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands found his face, tilted it toward her. Crimson eyes struggled to focus. "Stay with me," she ordered. Her voice cracked. "You don't get to die. You don't get to save me and train me and make me into this and then just die." Vaelin's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Bossy," he managed. His voice was barely a whisper. "Good. Queens should be bossy." "I'm serious." Selene could feel tears burning her eyes, refused to let them fall. "We need to get the poison out. Need to find a healer. Need to listen," Vaelin interrupted. His hand lifted shakily, found hers, squeezed with what little strength he had left. "Lucien's here. That means you have allies, means you can take Malric's throne, means you win. I don't care about winning if you're dead. Yes, you do. You have to care, because that's what makes you different from him. You care even when it hurts, even when it costs you everything." His eyes were starting to glaze. The poison was reaching his heart. Selene looked around frantically. Lady Morrigan was kneeling beside them now, her ancient hands already glowing with healing magic. But even from here, Selene could see the doubt on the old healer's face, could see the way her magic flickered and died against the poison in Vaelin's system. "It's nightshade and wolfsbane," Morrigan said quietly. "Mixed with something else I don't recognize. I can slow it, but I can't stop it, not without the antidote." "Do you have the antidote?" Selene demanded, whirling on Malric. The older alpha was on his knees now, held in place by 2 Valcrest warriors. His face was bruised where someone had hit him. Blood ran from his nose. He smiled. It was the cruelest expression Selene had ever seen. "Even if I did," he said softly, "why would I give it to you? You're about to watch the male you love die, just like I watched your mother burn. Seems fair, doesn't it?" Rage exploded through Selene's chest. She lunged before she could think, before anyone could stop her. Her hands closed around Malric's throat, squeezing with enough force to crush his windpipe. "Where is it?" she snarled. "Where's the antidote?" Malric just kept smiling, even as his face turned purple, even as his eyes bulged, even as death closed in around him. He wasn't going to tell her, would rather die than give her the satisfaction of saving Vaelin. And Selene realized with devastating clarity that she had a choice. She could kill Malric, could snap his neck right here, right now. Get the revenge she'd craved for 18 years. Watch the life drain from the eyes of the wolf who'd murdered her family. Or she could let him live. Could try to force the antidote from him. Could gamble Vaelin's life on the possibility that torture or threats or desperate bargaining might work where violence hadn't. Behind her, Vaelin's breathing hitched, stopped, restarted shallower. Time was running out. Lucian's voice cut through her rage. "There's another way. Selene turned. Lucian was staring at her with an intensity that made her chest ache, with understanding, with recognition of exactly what she was facing. The mating bond can share life force, he said quietly, if you accept it, if you let it complete. Your power could keep him alive long enough for us to find the antidote, long enough for his body to fight off the poison. Selene's blood went cold. You rejected me. The bond is broken. I rejected the bond. I didn't reject you. Lucian stepped closer. His silver eyes never left hers. And if you're willing to give me another chance, if you're willing to let fate have the last word, I can save him. We can save him. Together. The offer hung in the air between them. Impossible. Devastating. If she accepted the mating bond with Lucian, she'd be tied to him for life. Would feel his emotions, share his strength, be bound to him in ways that couldn't be undone. But Vaelin would live. Selene looked down at the king who'd saved her, who'd claimed her, who'd turned her from a broken servant into a weapon capable of toppling kingdoms. His eyes were closed now. His chest barely moved. She had seconds to decide. And in that moment, Selene understood what it meant to be a queen. Understood that power wasn't about getting what you wanted. It was about sacrificing what you loved for something bigger than yourself. She turned to Lucian. Do it, she said. Lucian crossed the space between them in 3 strides. His hand found the back of her neck, pulled her close. His forehead pressed against hers. This is going to hurt, he warned. I don't care. Just save him. Lucian's fangs sank into her throat, right over the claiming mark Vaelin had left 4 days ago. The pain was indescribable. 2 bonds trying to exist in the same space, tearing at each other, fighting for dominance. Selene screamed, couldn't help it. The agony ripped through her like lightning, burning every nerve ending, threatening to shatter her mind. But underneath the pain, power flooded her system. Lucien's strength combining with hers, magnifying it, turning her into a conduit for life itself. She felt the exact moment the bond snapped into place. Felt Lucien's emotions crash into her consciousness, felt his regret and hope and desperate determination to make this work. And through that connection, she channeled everything into Vaelin. Silver light exploded from her hands where they pressed against the Alpha Sovereign's chest. Pure lunar magic, amplified by the mating bond, flooding his dying body with life force strong enough to burn the poison from his veins. Vaelin's back arched. His eyes snapped open, blazing crimson. He gasped like a drowning man breaking the surface. The poison fought back. Selene could feel it, could feel the dark magic woven into the toxin trying to resist her light. So she burned hotter, poured more power into him, refused to let him go. Around them, the hall filled with silver fire. Nobles scrambled back. Warriors shielded their eyes. Even Malric stopped struggling, staring at the impossible thing happening in front of him. A lunar alpha channeling life through a mating bond she should never have been able to accept, saving a male she had no biological connection to, through sheer force of will and power older than kingdoms. The poison broke, shattered, evaporated into nothing. Vaelin sucked in a full breath, then another. Color flooded back into his face. His muscles responded when he tried to move. He was going to live. Selene collapsed. The power drained out of her all at once, leaving her hollow and shaking. Lucian caught her before she hit the ground, lowered her gently to sit with her back against his chest. Vaelin was already moving. He sat up with the fluid grace of someone who'd been fighting his entire life, scanned the room, took in the situation with frightening speed. His crimson eyes found Malric. The older alpha tried to run, made it 2 steps before Vaelin's hand closed around his throat, lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. You killed my parents, Vaelin said quietly, 15 years ago. Hired assassins to poison them during a peace summit. I never had proof, never could pin it on you. But I knew. Malric's face purpled, his legs kicked uselessly. And now you tried to kill me, tried to steal the female I claimed, tried to destroy the last heir of a bloodline you slaughtered because you were too weak to earn what they had. Vaelin's grip tightened, bones cracked. I sentence you to death, not as a king, as the son you orphaned, as the mate of the female you tried to break, as justice 18 years overdue. He snapped Malric's neck with casual efficiency, let the body drop to the marble floor like discarded trash. The hall was silent. Every noble, every warrior, every alpha who'd come to renew their oaths to a dead tyrant, all of them watching Selene. She sat in Lucian's arms, bonded to a male she'd once hated, having just saved the life of a king she might have loved, surrounded by the corpses of wolves who'd tried to destroy her. And she realized with stark clarity that nothing would ever be simple again. Malric's corpse hadn't even finished cooling before the hall erupted into chaos. The nobles who'd sworn loyalty to the dead tyrant scrambled for the exits. Warriors reached for weapons they hadn't been allowed to bring into the summit. Ancient alphas who'd survived 3 dynasties watched with calculating eyes, already measuring which way the wind would blow, already deciding whose banner would keep them alive longest. Selene stayed on the floor, Lucian's arms still around her, her body trembling from the power she'd channeled. The mating bond pulsed between them like a second heartbeat, foreign and intimate and impossible to ignore. She could feel his emotions bleeding into hers. Concern, protectiveness. And underneath it all, the kind of desperate hope that came from a male who'd thrown away everything and was praying the gamble would pay off. Vaelin stood over Malric's body, crimson eyes scanning the room with the cold assessment of a predator counting threats. His color was better. The poison was gone. But Selene could see the tension in his shoulders, could read the fury in the set of his jaw. He'd just realized what saving his life had cost her. The Alpha Sovereign's gaze locked onto Lucian. The temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees. Power radiated from Vaelin in waves that made warriors step back involuntarily, that made the ancient alphas lower their eyes in automatic submission. "Get your hands off her," Vaelin said quietly. The words carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind of command that emperors gave before they started executing people. Lucian didn't move. His grip on Selene tightened fractionally, protective rather than possessive. "She saved your life by accepting the bond with me," Lucien said. His voice was steady despite the fact that he was holding onto a female the most dangerous wolf in 6 kingdoms had claimed. "If I let go now, she'll collapse. The power drain nearly killed her. Then I'll catch her when she falls." Vaelin took a step forward. "Last warning, Draven. Remove your hands, or I remove them for you." "Stop," Selene managed. Her voice came out rough, exhausted. "Both of you just stop." She pushed herself upright, swaying when Lucien's support vanished. Her legs threatened to give out. She locked her knees through sheer force of will, refusing to show weakness in front of an audience that was already questioning whether she had the strength to hold a throne. The hall watched, waited. Every wolf present understood they were witnessing something that would echo through history. The moment a lunar alpha chose between the male fate had given her and the king who'd claimed her. Selene looked at Vaelin, at the male who'd saved her from humiliation, who'd broken the curse that had kept her powerless, who'd trained her to be a weapon sharp enough to reclaim everything stolen from her. His crimson eyes blazed with barely controlled rage, with betrayal, with the kind of possessive fury that came from an alpha who'd marked a female and then watched her bond with someone else. "You had a choice," he said. His voice was flat, cold. "You could have let me die, could have kept your freedom. Instead, you tied yourself to the male who destroyed you in front of a kingdom." "I tied myself to the only wolf strong enough to keep you alive," Selene corrected. Her throat was raw. Every word hurt. "Don't you dare make this about freedom when you were dying on the floor and I had seconds to decide. So you chose him. I chose to save you." The bond with Lucien was the cost, not the goal. Vaelin's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter. The result is the same. You're mated to Draven now, bound to him for life. Every wolf in this hall just watched you accept the male you swore you'd never forgive." "Because you were dying," Selene's voice cracked despite her efforts to keep it steady. "Because I would rather spend my life tied to someone I hate than watch you die when I had the power to stop it." The words hung in the air between them. Raw, honest, devastating. Something shifted in Vaelin's expression. The rage didn't disappear, but underneath it, Selene caught a glimpse of something else. Pain. Understanding. The kind of grief that came from realizing you'd been loved enough that someone would sacrifice their own happiness to keep you breathing. He looked away. Looked at Lucian, who'd stood silent through the entire exchange, his silver eyes never leaving Selene's face. "You have one chance to make this right," Vaelin said quietly. "One chance to prove you're worthy of a bond you didn't earn. You fail her. You hurt her. You make her regret this choice for even a second. and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you die screaming. Are we clear?" Lucien met the Alpha Sovereign's gaze without flinching, crystal clear. "Good." Vaelin turned to address the hall, his voice rising to carry across the assembled nobles. "Lord Malric Ravarin is dead. His bloodline is extinct. His stolen throne reverts to its rightful heir. From this moment forward, Selene Vaelor is the Alpha Queen of the Western Territories. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." Silence greeted the proclamation. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Lady Morgan dropped to one knee. The ancient she-wolf who'd served Selene's grandmother pressed her forehead to the blood-stained marble. "Long live the Silver Queen," she said. The words rippled through the hall. One by one, wolves began to kneel. Not all of them. Some of the nobles who'd profited from Malric's rule stayed standing, their faces calculating, already planning how to navigate this new world order. But enough knelt. Enough bent the knee to make it clear that Selene's claim was being recognized by the wolves who mattered. Selene watched her kingdom acknowledge her with numb detachment. This should have felt like victory, should have felt like justice. She'd reclaimed her throne, avenged her family, destroyed the male who'd enslaved her. Instead, she just felt empty. The mating bond pulsed. Lucien's emotions bled through the connection. Guilt, determination, and underneath it all, something that felt disturbingly like tenderness. She shoved the feeling away, couldn't deal with it. Not now. Not when she had to stand in front of 300 wolves and pretend she knew what she was doing. "Rise," she ordered. Her voice carried better than she expected. "Steadier. All of you. I'm not interested in watching you grovel. I'm interested in knowing which of you can be trusted and which of you need to be removed before you become a problem." The assembled nobles exchanged glances. This wasn't the speech they'd been expecting. New rulers were supposed to promise unity, forgiveness, a fresh start. Selene had no intention of lying to them. "You served Malric because he was strong enough to kill anyone who refused," she continued. "I understand that. Survival isn't a moral failing. It's the only thing that matters when you're living under a tyrant. But that excuse expires today. From now on, you serve House Vaelor because you choose to, because you believe I can protect you better than the next alpha who decides they want my throne. Or you leave. Tonight, before I start making examples." A few wolves stood and headed for the exits. Smart ones. Ones who recognized they didn't have the stomach for what was coming. The rest stayed. Selene studied them, read the fear in their eyes, the calculation, the desperate hope that she'd be easier to manipulate than Malric had been. She smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. "Let me be very clear about something," she said. "I spent 18 years as a slave, 18 years watching nobles like you drink wine. I poured while you laughed about the servant girl who couldn't even shift. I know exactly how you think, exactly how you operate, exactly how you'll smile to my face while you sharpen knives for my back." She descended from the dais where Malric's throne sat, walked among them, let them feel the weight of her aura, let them remember what they'd felt when her power had shattered the windows and dropped them to their knees. "So here's how this works," she continued. "You get one chance to prove your loyalty, one chance to show me you're useful. You waste it. You betray me. You even think about plotting against House Vaelor, and I will personally tear out your throat and mount your head on the walls as a reminder to the next ambitious fool who thinks I'm too weak to hold what's mine." The threat landed like a physical blow. Nobles went pale. Warriors shifted their weight nervously. But no one argued. No one challenged her. Because they'd all just watched her save the Alpha Sovereign's life through sheer force of will and power that should have killed her. They'd watched her channel magic older than kingdoms, watched her burn poison from a dying king's veins. They knew what she was capable of, and that knowledge was more valuable than any oath. Selene turned to Vaelin. The king stood near Malric's corpse, his expression unreadable. "I need your warriors to secure the fortress," she said. "Make sure none of Malric's loyalists try anything stupid in the next 24 hours. Can I count on you?" Vaelin studied her face, looking for something. Then he nodded once. "You can count on me," he said quietly. "Always." The word felt like a promise, like a vow, like something that mattered more than crowns or territories or any of the political games happening around them. Selene turned away before her composure cracked. focused on Lady Morrigan, who'd stood from her kneeling position and now waited with the patient stillness of someone who'd outlived 3 dynasties. "I need you to gather the House Vaelor records," Selene said. "Everything Malric didn't destroy, property deeds, treaties, bloodline documentation. I want to know exactly what I'm inheriting before I start making promises I can't keep." Morrigan bowed. "It will be done, my queen. My queen." The title felt foreign, heavy, like wearing armor that didn't quite fit. Selene pushed the feeling aside. She'd have time to process later. Right now, she had a kingdom to secure and enemies to neutralize before they became threats. The next 6 hours blurred together in a haze of blood and politics. Vaelin's warriors swept through the fortress, dragging out nobles who'd tried to flee with stolen valuables. Lucien coordinated with the Valicrest forces to establish perimeters around the throne room. Lady Morrigan produced documents from hidden vaults that Malric had somehow failed to find, proving beyond doubt that Selene was exactly who she claimed to be. And through it all, Selene stood in the center of the storm, making decisions that would echo through generations. She pardoned wolves who'd served under duress, executed 3 nobles who'd been actively involved in her family's massacre, offered positions of power to alphas who'd lost everything under Malric's rule and were hungry enough to be loyal to anyone who gave them a chance at redemption. By the time the sun set, House Vaelor controlled the Western Territories again. The transition had been brutal, bloody, frighteningly efficient. Selene stood alone in what had once been her father's study, staring at a portrait of her family that Malric had somehow kept instead of destroying. Her mother's face smiled down at her from the canvas, frozen in a moment of happiness that had died the night fire consumed their home. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn. Didn't need to. The mating bond told her exactly who'd entered. Lucien moved to stand beside her, his presence steady and grounding despite everything between them. "You should rest," he said quietly. "You've been awake for almost 30 hours. Your body needs to recover from the power drain." "My body can wait." Selene kept her eyes on her mother's painted face. "There are still loyalists in the dungeons who need interrogating, supply lines to secure, treaties to renegotiate, all of which will still be there tomorrow." Lucien's hand found her shoulder. Gentle, not demanding. "You're running on rage and adrenaline. That works for fighting, not for ruling." Selene finally turned to look at him. Really look at him. The male fate had chosen for her wore exhaustion like a second skin. Blood stained his armor. A cut above his eyebrow had stopped bleeding but would scar. He looked like he'd been through a war. They both had. "Why did you come?" she asked. "To the summit. You could have stayed in the north. Could have let me and Vaelin handle this alone." Lucien's jaw tightened. "Because I spent 4 days replaying the worst moment of my life over and over. Watching your face when I rejected you. Hearing you beg me not to break the bond. And I realized that every good thing I'd built, every alliance I'd secured, every political victory I'd won, it all meant nothing if I was too much of a coward to fight for the one thing that actually mattered." "You chose power over me," Selene said flatly. "You threw me away in front of a kingdom because I wasn't politically valuable enough." "I know." Lucien didn't look away, didn't make excuses. "I know exactly what I did, and I will spend the rest of my life making it right. Or I'll die trying. Those are the only 2 options I'm giving myself." The honesty was devastating. Selene wanted to throw it back in his face. Wanted to tell him that some betrayals couldn't be fixed with pretty words and dramatic gestures. But the bond wouldn't let her. She could feel his sincerity bleeding through the connection. Could feel the self-loathing that had been eating at him since the rejection. Could feel his desperate need to prove he was more than the worst thing he'd ever done. It didn't make what he'd done okay. But it made him human, flawed, broken in ways that matched her own damage. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly. "I don't know if I ever will, but I accept that we're bound now, that we're stuck with each other whether we like it or not." "Fair enough," Lucien said. "Then let me earn your forgiveness, however long it takes." Before Selene could respond, the study door slammed open. Vaelin strode in with the kind of barely controlled fury that preceded violence. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "A big one." Selene's exhaustion vanished instantly. "Talk." "Lord Silas Thorncroft just arrived with 200 warriors. He's demanding an audience with the, quote, rightful ruler of the Western Territories. And he's not talking about you. Selene's blood went cold. Silas Thorncroft was Malric's younger brother, a wolf who'd been conveniently absent from the summit, who'd spent the last 2 decades building his own power base in the southern reaches of the territory, a wolf who had just as much claim to House Raverin as his dead brother. "Where is he?" Selene demanded. "Courtyard, with enough armed wolves to take the fortress if we're not careful." Vaelin's expression was grim. "He's calling your claim illegitimate, says you're a pretender who murdered the rightful lord, says he's here to restore order and punish the traitors who killed his brother." "Of course he is." Selene moved toward the door. "How long do we have before he breaches the throne room?" "Maybe 20 minutes if we're lucky." Vaelin fell into step beside her. "My warriors are holding the inner gates, but we're outnumbered. If it comes to a full battle, we'll lose. Then we don't let it come to a full battle." Selene's mind raced, calculating angles, weighing options. "I'll meet with him. Negotiate." "Negotiate what?" Lucian interjected. He'd followed them into the corridor. "The man wants you dead. There's nothing to negotiate. There's always something to negotiate. Power. Territory. The promise that he'll die quickly instead of slowly if he doesn't stand down." Selene kept moving, her boots striking marble with the steady rhythm of someone marching toward war. "I didn't survive 18 years as a slave by fighting every battle head-on. Sometimes you win by making your enemies think they've already won." They reached the throne room to find it had been transformed into a war council. Vaelin's warriors lined the walls. The Valicrest forces had created a defensive perimeter around the throne. Lady Morgan stood near the dais with a group of advisors, already pulling records that would support Selene's claim. And in the center of it all, visible through the massive windows overlooking the courtyard, stood Lord Silas Thorncroft. He looked nothing like Malric. Where his brother had been cold and calculating, Silas radiated raw aggression. He was younger, broader, built like a brawler who'd won every fight through sheer brutality rather than strategy. 200 warriors flanked him, battle-hardened wolves wearing the crimson and black of House Raverin, all of them armed, all of them ready to turn this fortress into a slaughterhouse. Selene studied the formation, looked for weaknesses, found none that wouldn't cost her half her forces to exploit. "Open the gates," she ordered. "Let him in." Vaelin turned on her. "Are you insane? The moment those gates open, I prove I'm not afraid of him," Selene interrupted. "I prove I have the strength to face an enemy on his terms instead of hiding behind walls." "Open the gates." Vaelin looked like he wanted to argue, looked like he wanted to physically drag her away from this confrontation. But he'd already acknowledged her as queen, already bent the knee in front of 300 witnesses. He couldn't override her now without undermining everything they'd just built. The Alpha Sovereign turned to his warriors. "Open the gates, but keep your weapons ready. First sign of treachery, you kill everything wearing Ravarin colors." The gates groaned open. Silas Thorncroft strode into the throne room with the confidence of a wolf who'd never lost a fight. His warriors followed in tight formation, spreading out to flank the walls, creating a mirror image of Vaelin's defensive positions. The two forces faced each other across the blood-stained marble. Waiting. One wrong move and the hall would erupt into chaos. Silas stopped 10 feet from the throne. His eyes swept over Selene with open contempt. "So you're the little servant girl claiming to be a Vaelor," he said. His voice was gravel and violence. "Funny. You don't look like a queen. You look like something my brother should have drowned in the nearest river." Selene smiled. It was the expression she'd practiced in mirrors for 3 days. The one that said she wasn't afraid. The one that promised violence. "And you look like someone who's about to make the last mistake of his very short life," she said pleasantly. "But please, keep talking. I enjoy watching wolves dig their own graves." Silas's expression darkened. "You murdered my brother. Your brother murdered my family, slaughtered them in their own home, stole their territory, cursed their last surviving heir, and enslaved her for 18 years. I'd say his execution was justice served cold." "Justice," Silas spat. "You call it justice when you kill a rightful lord in front of his own court, when you use dark magic to steal a throne that doesn't belong to you. The throne belonged to House Vaelor for 300 years before your brother decided murder was easier than earning respect." Selene descended from the dais, moving closer to Silas with deliberate slowness. And I have the bloodline marks to prove it. The lunar crest, the ancient script, the power that every wolf in this room felt when I manifested. What do you have, Lord Silas? A name stolen from the wolf your family killed. That's not a claim. That's a war crime. Silas took a step forward. His warriors tensed. So did Vaelin's. The air crackled with the promise of violence. You want to challenge me, Selene said quietly. Then do it properly. Single combat. Traditional rights. The winner takes the Western territories. The loser dies. No armies. No politics. Just two wolves and the question of who's strong enough to rule. Silas's eyes narrowed. You think you can beat me in a fair fight? You're half my size. I think I've survived things that would have broken you in half. I think I spent 18 years getting stronger while you spent them getting comfortable. I think fate brought me back from the grave for exactly this moment. Selene let her wolf rise to the surface. Let her eyes bleed silver. Let the runes on her skin ignite with cold fire. But if you're afraid of a female half your size, you can always tuck your tail and run. I'll even give you a 10-minute head start before I hunt you down and kill you anyway. The insult hit like a slap. Silas's face flushed red. His hands curled into fists. Behind Selene, she felt Lucien move closer through the bond, felt his protective instinct screaming at him to intervene, felt Vaelin's rage building like a storm about to break. But this was her fight, her crown, her chance to prove she didn't need anyone to save her. Accepted, Silas snarled. Single combat, tomorrow at dawn. And when I rip out your throat, the Western territories revert to House Thorncroft. When you lose, Selene corrected, your warriors leave peacefully. No revenge plots. No attempts to destabilize my rule. They bend the knee or they die with you. Those are the terms. Silas smiled. It was the expression of a wolf who'd just been handed exactly what he wanted. Done, he said. Then get out of my throne room. Selene turned her back on him. The ultimate insult, the clearest statement that she didn't consider him a threat worth watching. You're dismissed, Lord Silas. See you at dawn. For a moment she thought he might attack anyway. Felt his rage spike. Felt his wolf surge forward. Then his warriors grabbed his arms, pulled him back, whispered urgent warnings about protocol and honor and the consequences of breaking a formal challenge. Silas shook them off, cast one last venomous glare at Selene's back. Then he turned and left, his warriors following in tight formation. The gates closed behind them with a boom that echoed through the hall. Silence reigned for exactly 3 seconds. Then Vaelin exploded. What the hell were you thinking? He roared. Silas Thorncroft has killed more wolves in single combat than you've met in your entire life. He's been fighting since before you were born, and you just challenged him to a duel you have no chance of winning. I have every chance of winning, Selene said calmly. I'm faster, more powerful, and I have something he doesn't. What? Lucian's voice was tight. What could you possibly have that gives you an advantage over a wolf who's built his entire reputation on being unkillable in fair fights? Selene turned to face them both. Let them see the cold certainty in her eyes. Let them understand exactly what they were looking at. I have nothing left to lose, she said quietly. Silas fights to protect his pride, his reputation, his comfortable life as a warlord. I fight because if I lose, I die. And wolves with their backs against the wall are always more dangerous than wolves defending territory they already own. The words settled over the room like a shroud. Vaelin stared at her, really looked at her, and she watched the moment he understood. She wasn't the broken servant he'd saved, wasn't the frightened girl who'd begged Lucien not to reject her, wasn't even the female who'd channeled power to save his life. She was something new. Something forged in fire and trauma, and the kind of rage that turned victims into monsters. She was a queen, and queens didn't ask permission to fight their own battles. You're going to get yourself killed, Vaelin said. But there was resignation in his voice now. Acceptance. Maybe, Selene agreed, but I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And if tomorrow is my last dawn, at least I'll face it as myself. Not as the slave Malric made me, not as the rejected mate Lucien threw away. As Selene Vaelor, the Silver Queen, the last heir of a bloodline that refused to stay buried. She looked at Lucien, at the mate fate had given her, at the male who'd bonded with her to save another wolf's life. If I die tomorrow, the bond breaks, she said. You'll be free. No obligations, no guilt. Lucien's silver eyes blazed. I don't want to be free. I want you to survive. Then help me train. Both of you. I have 12 hours before dawn. 12 hours to learn everything you know about killing wolves bigger and stronger than me. 12 hours to become dangerous enough that Silas Thorncroft dies regretting he ever spoke my name. Vaelin and Lucienne exchanged glances. Some wordless communication passing between two alpha males who should have been tearing each other apart, but had somehow found themselves on the same side. Then Vaelin nodded. Fine, he said. We train. And when the sun rises tomorrow, you're going to walk onto that battlefield and remind every wolf in 6 territories why lunar alphas are the most terrifying creatures fate ever created. Selene felt something crack open in her chest. Not hope. Hope was too fragile for what was coming. But determination, cold, hard, unbreakable. She'd survived 18 years of slavery, survived rejection, survived a poisoned king and a civil war and the weight of a crown she'd never asked for. She could survive one more fight, and if she couldn't, she'd make damn sure Silas Thorncroft followed her into whatever waited beyond death. The training began immediately. The training ground behind the fortress was carved from frozen earth and stained with the blood of 1,000 practice duels. Torches ringed the space, casting shadows that danced across snow already trampled into mud by boots and claws and bodies that had learned violence the hard way. Selene stood in the center wearing leather armor stripped down to the essentials. No ceremonial plating, no decorative elements, just functional protection over vital organs and freedom of movement everywhere else. Her silver hair was pulled back tight enough to ache. Her hands were wrapped in cloth to protect knuckles that would be split and bleeding before the night was done. Across from her, Vaelin and Lucienne had removed their shirts despite the cold. Steam rose from their skin as they shifted their weight, circling her like predators, teaching a younger wolf how to survive in a world designed to kill her. You're fast, Vaelin said. His crimson eyes tracked her every movement. But Silas is faster. He's been fighting longer, knows more tricks. So you can't rely on speed alone. Then what do I rely on? Selene asked. Her muscles were already screaming from the last 2 hours of drills. Every part of her body hurt. Unpredictability, Lucian answered. He moved left. Vaelin moved right, forcing her to track both threats simultaneously. Silas fights like a brawler, overwhelming force applied until his opponent breaks. He's used to wolves who panic when he starts hitting them, used to victory through intimidation, so I don't panic. You use his expectations against him, Vaelin corrected. Make him think you're breaking, make him overcommit. Then you go for the kill when he's vulnerable. Easier said than done, Selene muttered. Then let's make it easier. Vaelin attacked without warning, a blur of motion that had her stumbling backward, barely getting her arms up in time to block the strike aimed at her throat. The impact rattled her bones. Vaelin didn't pull his punches, didn't coddle or hold back. He hit her like he was trying to kill her because tomorrow Silas would be trying to kill her, and mercy in training meant death in combat. Selene countered with a low sweep. Vaelin jumped it. Lucian came in from the side, forcing her to split her attention. She blocked his first strike, missed the second. His fist connected with her ribs hard enough to crack something. Pain exploded white-hot through her chest. Selene gasped, staggered, tasted copper. Again Vaelin ordered, "Don't stop. The moment you stop moving is the moment you die." They came at her together. 2 alpha males who'd been fighting since before she was born, coordinating attacks with the kind of seamless efficiency that only came from years of battlefield experience. Selene tried to defend, tried to counter, got hit more often than not. But she learned to read the micro-expressions that preceded a strike, learned which feints were real and which were designed to make her waste energy. Learned that fighting wasn't about being the strongest wolf in the ring. It was about being the smartest, the most willing to adapt, the one who could take a beating and keep thinking through the pain. Hours blurred together. The moon crossed the sky. Torches burned down to embers and were replaced. Selene's body became a map of bruises and split skin and muscles pushed past their breaking point. But she got better. By the time the sky started lightening toward dawn, she'd managed to put Lucian on his back twice and actually landed a hit on Vaelin that drew blood. The Alpha Sovereign touched the cut on his cheek, studied the crimson on his fingers, then smiled. "Good," he said. "Now you're fighting like you mean it." Selene collapsed onto the frozen ground, gasping. Every breath hurt. Her vision swam. She'd pushed her body past exhaustion into something else entirely, some place where pain stopped being relevant and survival became the only thing that mattered. Lucienne knelt beside her, offered water. She drank without thinking, let the cold liquid soothe her raw throat. "You need to rest," he said quietly. "At least an hour before the duel. Your body won't recover fully, but it'll recover enough." "I don't have time to rest." Selene tried to stand. Her legs refused to cooperate. "Silas will be fresh, rested. I need every advantage I can get." "You need to not collapse from exhaustion before the fight even starts," Vaelor countered. He'd pulled his shirt back on, was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe. Or fear. Or both. 1 hour. Then we walk onto that battlefield and watch you either become a legend or die trying. The blunt honesty should have terrified her. Instead, it was almost comforting. No false hope. No pretty lies. Just the acknowledgement that tomorrow she might cease to exist, and that was a risk worth taking. Selene let Lucien help her to her feet. Let him guide her back toward the fortress, through corridors that were starting to fill with wolves preparing for the spectacle. Word had spread. Every pack within riding distance had sent representatives. The courtyard where the duel would take place was already packed with hundreds of wolves, all of them waiting to see if the Silver Queen would survive her first real challenge. Lucien brought her to a small chamber near the throne room. Someone had prepared it. Clean clothes laid out on the bed, water for washing, food she wouldn't be able to eat because her stomach was too twisted with anticipation. "I'll be right outside," Lucien said. "If you need anything." Selene caught his wrist before he could leave. The mating bond pulsed between them, carrying emotions she wasn't ready to name. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming back, for helping, for not giving up even when I gave you every reason to." Lucien's silver eyes softened. "I told you. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this right. Today is just the beginning." He left before she could respond. The door closed with a soft click. Selene stood alone in the chamber, staring at her reflection in the polished shield hanging on the wall. The female looking back at her was a stranger. Silver hair matted with sweat and dried blood. Eyes that had seen too much. A face marked by exhaustion and determination in equal measure. She looked like someone who'd been through a war. She supposed she had been. Selene stripped off her training clothes, washed the worst of the blood and dirt from her skin. Her body was a canvas of bruises, purple and black and yellow marks covering her ribs, her arms, her throat where Vaelor had landed a strike that would have crushed her windpipe if he'd used full force. Tomorrow these bruises might be the last thing she ever saw. Might be the map of her final hours, written in pain across skin that wouldn't survive past dawn. The thought should have scared her. Instead, she felt calm. Clear. Like everything that had happened in the last 5 days had been leading to this exact moment, this exact choice. Live or die. But do it on her own terms, as herself. Not as anyone's slave or rejected mate or political pawn. Just Selene. The last Vaelor. The Silver Queen who'd crawled out of her own grave and decided that survival wasn't enough anymore. She dressed in the clothes someone had prepared. Simple leather pants, a loose shirt that wouldn't restrict movement. No armor. The duel had rules, traditional combat, claws and fangs, and the raw strength of 2 wolves trying to kill each other. Armor would be seen as cowardice. Selene braided her hair with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. Checked her reflection one last time. Then she opened the door and walked toward her fate. The courtyard had been transformed into an arena. Someone had cleared the center, marked boundaries in the snow. Torches lined the perimeter despite the dawn light creeping across the sky. Hundreds of wolves packed the space, nobles and warriors and common pack members all gathered to witness history. At one end of the arena stood Silas Thorncroft. He'd stripped to the waist, showing off muscle that looked like it had been carved from stone. Scars covered his torso, battle wounds worn like trophies. His eyes tracked Selene the moment she emerged from the fortress, cold and calculating and utterly confident. At the other end, Vaelor and Lucien waited. They'd taken positions as her seconds, standing where they could intervene if the duel rules were broken, but otherwise forced to watch without helping. Selene crossed the courtyard. The crowd parted for her. She could feel their eyes, could hear the whispers, placing bets on how long she'd last. speculating on whether Silas would make it quick or draw it out for entertainment. She blocked it all out, focused on the cleared space ahead, on the male who wanted her dead, on the fight that would determine whether House Vaelor survived or died with her. Lady Morrigan stood at the edge of the arena, her ancient eyes solemn. She would serve as witness, would declare the victor, would make sure whoever survived followed the rules that govern challenges like this. The last wolves filed into place. Silence fell. Morrigan's voice rang out across the courtyard, formal and weighted with ritual older than kingdoms. We gather to witness single combat between Selene Vaelor, claimant to the Western Territories, and Silas Thorncroft, challenger to that claim. The rules are ancient. No weapons. No outside interference. The fight ends when one wolf yields or dies. The victor takes the throne. The vanquished forfeits all claims. Do both parties accept these terms? I accept, Selene said. Her voice carried better than she expected. Steady, clear. I accept, Silas echoed. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, ready to end this, then let the challenge begin. Silas shifted before Morrigan finished speaking. His body exploded into his wolf form, massive and scarred and built for killing. He was bigger than Selene had expected, easily matching Vaelin's size. Dark fur rippled over muscle as he snarled, showing fangs designed to crush bone. Selene shifted a heartbeat later. Her silver wolf emerged in a flash of moonlight, smaller than Silas, but faster, more agile. She could feel her power humming beneath fur and fang, the lunar magic that made her different from every other alpha in 6 territories. Silas charged. He came in like an avalanche, all overwhelming force and brutal momentum. Selene dodged left, felt his jaws snap shut inches from where her throat had been. His claws raked across her shoulder, drawing first blood. The crowd roared. Selene ignored them. She countered with a strike at his exposed flank. Her claws connected, tore through fur and skin. Silas barely seemed to notice. He spun faster than something his size should be able to move, his massive head slamming into her rib cage. The impact launched Selene across the arena. She hit the ground hard, rolled, forced herself back onto her paws before Silas could capitalize. Pain screamed through her chest. Something was definitely broken now. Silas circled her slowly. Blood dripped from the wound she'd opened, but he moved like it didn't matter. Like he could bleed all day and still have enough strength to kill her. You're fast, his voice echoed through the pack link that connected all shifted wolves. But fast won't save you when I can take 10 hits for every one you land. He charged again. Selene met him head-on this time instead of dodging. Their bodies collided with a crack that echoed across the courtyard. Fangs snapped at throats. Claws tore at flesh. They rolled across frozen ground in a tangle of fur and blood and violence. Selene got her jaws around his foreleg, bit down hard enough to feel bone creak. Silas roared and threw his weight sideways, ripping free but leaving skin and fur behind. They separated, both bleeding now, both breathing hard. Selene could feel her energy draining, the training, the lack of sleep, the cracked ribs that made every breath agony. Silas had been right. She was faster, but he could absorb punishment that would have dropped her twice already. This was a war of attrition, and she was losing. Silas seemed to sense it. His confidence grew. He stalked forward with the patience of a predator who knew his prey was weakening, knew it was only a matter of time before exhaustion did what his fangs couldn't. Not like this, Selene thought. I didn't survive everything just to die in the dirt, because I ran out of stamina. She reached deep, pulled at the lunar magic that had been sleeping inside her for 18 years, the power that had shattered windows and dropped nobles to their knees, the birthright that made her more than just another alpha. Silver light erupted from her fur. The runes hidden beneath started glowing, visible even through her wolf form. Ancient script that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, feeding her strength she didn't naturally possess. Silas's eyes widened. He'd been expecting a normal fight, normal rules. But there was nothing normal about lunar alphas. Selene moved, not faster than before, faster than possible. She crossed the space between them in a blur, her fangs finding his throat before he could react. She didn't bite down. Not yet. Just held him there, her jaws pressed against his jugular, her body pinning his with strength magnified by magic, older than the kingdoms watching them fight. Silas struggled. His greater weight should have let him throw her off. But the lunar power flowing through Selene's muscles changed the equation, made her immovable, inexorable. "Yield!" she growled through the pack link, her jaws tightened fractionally. Yield or die. Silas went still. She felt the moment his wolf recognized defeat, felt his muscles relax in submission. "I yield," he managed. His mental voice was raw, bitter, but honest. Selene held him there for another 3 heartbeats, making sure every wolf watching understood, making sure they saw him submit, saw him acknowledge her dominance. Then she released him and stepped back. Silas shifted back to human form immediately, dropped to his knees in the snow. Blood ran from the wounds on his throat and leg, but he didn't move to staunch the bleeding, just knelt there, staring at the ground. The courtyard erupted. Wolves howled. Nobles shouted. The sound was deafening. Selene shifted back to human form, stood naked and bloodied in the center of the arena while her kingdom roared its approval. Lady Morrigan's voice cut through the chaos. "Selene Vaelor is victorious. The challenge is met. The throne is claimed. Long live the Silver Queen." "Long live the Silver Queen," the crowd echoed. The words became a chant, a roar that shook the fortress walls. Selene stood there, feeling the weight of what she'd just done settle over her like a crown made of responsibility and blood. This was real now, permanent. She'd won her throne through combat, through strength, through magic that proved beyond doubt she was exactly what she claimed to be. No one would question her legitimacy again. Valen appeared beside her, wrapping a cloak around her shoulders. His crimson eyes blazed with pride and something else. Relief, maybe, that she'd survived. "Well fought," he said quietly. "Your grandmother would have been proud." The words hit harder than any blow Silas had landed. Selene felt something crack in her chest. 18 years of buried grief trying to surface all at once. She shoved it down. Later. She could fall apart later. Right now she had to be the queen these wolves needed. Strong, unbreakable, in control. She turned to Silas. The older wolf was still kneeling in the snow, his warriors gathered behind him, all of them waiting to see what she'd do. Traditional rules said she could execute him, could remove the threat permanently. But Selene had spent 18 years watching Malric rule through fear, watched him turn potential allies into enemies because he couldn't imagine any other way to hold power. She wouldn't make the same mistake. "Stand up," she ordered. Silas looked up slowly. Confusion flickered across his face. Then he stood, wincing as his injured leg took weight. "You challenged me honorably," Selene said. Her voice carried across the silent courtyard. "Fought well, lost with dignity. Those are traits I value, traits this kingdom needs." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm not going to kill you." Selene met his gaze, held it. "I'm saying I'm offering you a choice. Bend the knee. Swear loyalty to House Vaelor. Serve me the way you would have served your brother. And in return, I'll give you command of the southern territories. Let you keep your warriors, your lands, your honor." The offer hung in the air. Every wolf in the courtyard held their breath. Silas studied her face, looking for the trap, the hidden clause that would turn this mercy into another form of slavery. Selene let him look, let him see the honesty in her eyes. "Why?" Silas finally asked. "Why show mercy to someone who wanted you dead?" "Because killing you doesn't make me stronger. It just makes me one more tyrant ruling through fear instead of loyalty." Selene's voice softened. "And I've seen what that kind of rule does to a kingdom. Watched it tear families apart, turn neighbors into enemies, create the kind of rot that destroys empires from the inside out. I won't be that kind of queen. And if I refuse, if I take my warriors and leave, then you leave. I won't hunt you, won't send assassins. You'll have safe passage out of the western territories, and my word that House Vaelor won't pursue vengeance. But you'll never be able to come back, never reclaim what you're walking away from." Silas was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Pride against pragmatism. The humiliation of bending the knee against the practical reality that he'd just lost everything, and she was offering him a way to keep most of it. Finally, slowly, he lowered himself back to his knees. "I, Silas Thorncroft, swear loyalty to Selene Vaelor, rightful queen of the Western Territories." His voice was rough, bitter, but sincere. I pledge my sword, my warriors, and my life to the defense of House Vaelor and the kingdom it protects." The words echoed with the weight of binding magic, ancient oaths that couldn't be broken without consequences worse than death. Selene felt the pledge settle into place, felt Silas become part of her pack, part of her kingdom. "Rise, Lord Silas," she said, "and welcome home." The courtyard erupted again, this time with something that sounded almost like hope, like these wolves who'd lived under tyranny for 18 years were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The rest of the day blurred together in a haze of ceremony and politics. Selene stood before the assembled nobles and accepted their oaths of loyalty, watched wolves who'd served Malrek swear allegiance to his victim, saw the fear in their eyes gradually shift to something else as she proved over and over that she meant what she'd said about ruling differently. She pardoned wolves who'd committed crimes under duress, offered positions to females who'd been overlooked because of their gender, abolished laws that had been designed solely to keep Malrik's enemies weak and afraid. And through it all, Vaelin stood at her right hand and Lucien at her left. Two alpha males who should have been tearing each other apart, but had somehow become the foundation she built her new kingdom on. By the time the sun set, Selene's voice was hoarse and her body was screaming for rest. But she'd done it. She'd secured her throne, united the fractured territories, turned enemies into allies through a combination of strength and mercy that no one had expected. The feast that night was supposed to be a celebration, tables groaning with food, wine flowing freely, music and dancing, and wolves reveling in the fact that they'd survived another day. But Selene couldn't bring herself to join them. She slipped away from the great hall, made her way through corridors that had once belonged to her family, until she found herself standing in front of the memorial garden where her parents had been buried. Someone had maintained it. Even through Malrik's reign, someone had kept the flowers growing and the stone markers clean. Selene knelt in front of her mother's grave, traced the letters carved into marble with fingers that were finally steady. Selene Vaelor, beloved wife, devoted mother, healer who gave everything. "I did it," Selene whispered. Her voice cracked. "I took back what they stole, made them pay for what they did to you, to all of us." The garden was silent except for the wind moving through bare branches. "But I don't feel like I thought I would," Selene continued. She was crying now, tears tracking through the dirt and blood still on her face. "I thought revenge would feel like victory, like closure, but all I feel is tired and alone. And like no matter how many wolves bend the knee, I'll never stop being that 6-year-old girl who watched her mother burn." Footsteps crunched on gravel behind her. Selene didn't turn. Knew from the scent and the pull of the mating bond exactly who'd followed her. Lucien knelt beside her in the snow. He didn't speak, didn't try to fix anything, just sat there in silence while she grieved for everything she'd lost and everything she could never get back. After a while, Vaelin appeared on her other side. The three of them kneeling in front of graves, bearing witness to pain that couldn't be healed with power or politics or any of the tools they'd used to build empires. "Your mother would be proud of you," Vaelin finally said. His voice was quiet, gentle in a way she'd never heard from him before. "Not because you won, but because you chose mercy when you had every right to choose violence. That's what makes you different from wolves like Malrik," Lucien added. "You understand that strength isn't about how many enemies you can destroy. It's about how many you can turn into allies, how many lives you can make better instead of worse." Selene looked at them both, at the king who'd saved her and the mate who'd betrayed her, and somehow both of them had become the foundation she built herself on. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "How to be a queen, how to rule a kingdom, how to wake up every day knowing people are counting on me to make decisions that could get them killed." "None of us do," Vaelin said. "We're all just making it up as we go, trying not to destroy everything we touch, hoping that the good we do outweighs the damage. And when we fail," Lucien continued, "when we make mistakes that cost lives or break things that can't be fixed, we have to find a way to forgive ourselves and keep moving forward, because the alternative is giving up. And giving up means everyone who's counting on us suffers." Selene let the words sink in, let herself feel the weight of the crown she'd claimed, let herself acknowledge that this burden would never get lighter, would never stop demanding pieces of her soul. But she'd carried heavier burdens, had survived worse than the weight of responsibility. She could do this. Not perfectly, not without mistakes. But she could try, and maybe that was enough. The three of them sat in the memorial garden until the moon rose overhead. Then Selene stood, brushed the snow from her knees, and turned to face the fortress where her new life waited. "I'm ready," she said. "Ready for what?" Vaelor asked. "Everything." Selene started walking back toward the lights and music and the kingdom that was hers now. "All the mistakes I'm going to make, all the wolves I'm going to disappoint, all the impossible choices between bad options and worse ones. I'm ready to face it." "Together," Lucian said. It wasn't a question. Selene looked at him, at the male fate had bound her to, the one who'd destroyed her and saved her in equal measure. And she realized that she didn't hate him anymore, didn't love him either. But maybe, with time, they could build something honest, something real. Together, she agreed. The weeks that followed were exhausting, but productive. Selene threw herself into rebuilding what 18 years of tyranny had broken. She negotiated treaties with neighboring kingdoms, established trade routes that had been abandoned under Malric's isolationist policies, created councils where common wolves could bring grievances without fear of execution. And slowly, gradually, the Western territories began to heal. Lucian proved himself more valuable than she'd expected. He understood politics in ways she didn't, knew which nobles needed to be placated and which needed to be reminded who held the power. He stood beside her through endless meetings, offered advice when she needed it, and backed her decisions even when he disagreed. The mating bond strengthened. She could feel his presence constantly now, could sense his emotions bleeding into hers. It should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt grounding, like having an anchor when the weight of the crown threatened to drag her under. Vaelor stayed for a month before duty called him back to the Nightfang Citadel. But before he left, he pulled Selene aside in the throne room, his crimson eyes serious. "You're going to be a great queen," he said. "Better than I ever was a king, because you remember what it's like to be powerless, and that makes you dangerous to tyrants and hope for everyone else." "Come back and visit," Selene said. "Don't be a stranger." Vaelor smiled. It was the first genuinely warm expression she'd ever seen on his face. "Try to stop me," he said. Then he was gone, riding north with his warriors, leaving Selene to rule the kingdom they'd fought so hard to reclaim. 6 months after the duel, Selene stood on the balcony overlooking her territories and watched spring slowly melt the winter snow. Green was returning to the forests. Rivers that had been frozen for months were flowing again. And for the first time in 18 years, the wolves under her protection weren't living in fear. Lucian joined her on the balcony, wrapping an arm around her waist. The touch was casual now, comfortable. They still hadn't fully figured out what they were to each other, but they were trying, learning, building something that might eventually look like love if they were patient enough. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything and nothing." Selene leaned into his warmth. "How far we've come. How much further we have to go. Whether I'm doing any of this right. You're doing fine. Better than fine. The kingdom is thriving. People are happy. That's more than most rulers can claim." "It's not enough," Selene said. "It'll never be enough. There's always more to fix, more problems to solve, more wolves suffering somewhere I haven't looked yet." "That's what makes you a good queen," Lucian said quietly. "The fact that you care. The fact that enough will never be enough for you." Selene was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you regret it? The bond? Being stuck with me?" Lucian turned her to face him, his silver eyes serious. "I regret that I hurt you," he said. "I regret that I was too stupid and arrogant to see what fate was offering me until it was almost too late. But I don't regret this. Being here with you, building something that matters, finding out that the female I rejected was stronger and braver and more worthy than I could have imagined." He kissed her, slow and gentle. And for the first time, Selene kissed him back without the ghost of rejection standing between them. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "You're getting better at this," she said. "I have a good teacher." They stood together on the balcony, watching the sun set over the kingdom they'd built from ashes and blood, and the kind of stubborn determination that refused to stay broken. And Selene realized that this was what victory actually looked like, not the dramatic moment when she'd won the duel. Not the day Malric died, but this. Standing beside someone she was learning to trust again, watching her people live without fear, knowing that tomorrow would bring new problems, but also new chances to do better. She thought about the servant girl who'd knelt on a marble floor while nobles laughed at her suffering. Thought about how that girl would never have believed she'd end up here, wearing a crown, ruling territories, strong enough that kingdoms treated her as an equal instead of a slave. That girl was gone, had died the night Vaelin claimed her, and everything changed. But maybe that was okay. Maybe some deaths were necessary. Maybe you had to burn away everything weak and frightened and beaten down before you could become something powerful enough to survive. Selene Vaelor, the Silver Queen, stood on her balcony and watched night fall over an empire she'd reclaimed through blood and mercy, and the kind of strength that only came from surviving the unsurvivable. And she knew, deep in her bones, that this was just the beginning. There would be more battles, more enemies, more impossible choices between the wolves she loved and the kingdom she served. But she was ready. Because the most dangerous rulers weren't born from privilege. They were forged from suffering powerful enough to either destroy the soul or crown it. And Selene had been crowned in fire. The story of the Silver Queen who'd crawled from her grave and forced an empire to remember what lunar alphas were capable of would echo through generations, would become legend, would inspire countless wolves who thought they were too broken to be anything more than victims. But that night, standing on her balcony with spring wind in her hair and the weight of her crown finally feeling like it belonged there, Selene wasn't thinking about legacy or legend or any of the grand narratives historians would write about her. She was thinking about tomorrow, about the trade dispute she'd have to mediate, about the new school she wanted to build for orphaned pups, about whether Vaelin would actually visit like he'd promised, about all the small, unglamorous work of actually being a queen instead of just claiming the title. And she was thinking that maybe, just maybe, she could do this. Not perfectly. Never perfectly. But honestly, with everything she had, for as long as her strength held out. The moon rose overhead, full and silver, watching over the last daughter of House Vaelor with the patient attention of something older than kingdoms. And if fate was watching too, if the moon goddess who'd bound her to Lucian was paying attention, maybe she understood. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't the ones that start perfect. They're the ones that survive being shattered and learn to build something new from the pieces. Selene turned away from the balcony, took Lucian's hand, walked back into the fortress where a feast waited and a kingdom needed its queen. And she didn't look back. Didn't let herself dwell on what she'd lost or who she'd been before everything changed. Because the past was ash, and she'd spent enough time burning. It was time to build something that would last.